All right, let's jump right into our deep dive all about building generational wealth. You guys have brought some really interesting ideas to the table, particularly these strategies focused on 2025 and beyond. We're taking a look at this documentary, 10 Ways to Create Generational Wealth in 2025, and whoa, they really throw a curveball right off the bat. They suggest buying Bitcoin as like the foundation for building wealth. I was pretty surprised by that one. I'll definitely break that down and look at that idea. And of course, we've got to cover the more, I guess you'd say, traditional approaches like real estate. But first, I'm really curious, what were your first impressions of this documentary? What stood out to you?
Well, I think what struck me the most was just how directly they address this whole Bitcoin thing. They suggest that this volatility that makes people so nervous about Bitcoin might actually be the key. Like if you can understand and kind of roll with that volatility, it could be your path to long-term success, which is a bold statement, let me tell you.
It definitely is. And it makes you think twice about just writing Bitcoin off completely. So let's dig into that a little bit. The documentary, they make a pretty strong argument in favor of Bitcoin as this wealth building tool, especially for 2025, right? For someone who's maybe hearing about this for the first time, how would you explain the potential of Bitcoin?
Okay, so imagine a currency that's completely free from any government or bank control. That's Bitcoin in a nutshell.
Yeah.
It's decentralized, so basically it runs on this global network of computers, and the supply of Bitcoin is limited, just like gold. And these features are attracting a lot of investors who are looking for something outside of those traditional financial systems.
But we've got to talk about that volatility thing. I know personally, I'd be pretty nervous putting money into something that fluctuates in value so wildly. So, is Bitcoin something that every single investor should consider, or is it more for people who are okay with, a little higher risk?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bitcoin's definitely not a passive investment. It takes research, a willingness to learn the tech behind it, and a pretty high tolerance for risk. It's not for the, how do you say, the risk averse,
Right.
but for those who are willing to put in the time to really understand it and are able to kind of ride the waves, so to speak. It could be a really valuable part of a diversified portfolio. The documentary really pushes that long-term view of Bitcoin. And I think that's incredibly important.
So maybe not going all in, but maybe dipping your toes in after you've done your research. That makes sense. Now, the documentary also spends a decent amount of time on tangible assets, especially real estate. They seem to be advocating for this back to basics approach with a focus on cash flowing properties. I'm curious about this. Why do you think they're highlighting that in a documentary that's specifically looking ahead to 2025?
I think there's something to be said about the security that comes with owning something tangible, especially in a world that's becoming more and more digital. Real estate, especially properties that generate rental income, offers that stability. You've got this physical asset, you're potentially getting this regular income. And historically, real estate tends to go up in value over time.
And they even specifically talk about looking for emerging markets when it comes to real estate. So I'm assuming that's because the potential for growth is higher in those areas, right?
That's exactly it. Emerging markets often have opportunities for greater returns, although, of course, higher risk as well. It's all about finding that sweet spot. And on the topic of balance, they also recommend adding gold and silver to your portfolio, precious metals, either through buying the actual physical metals or through ETFs. Gold and silver have long been considered safe haven assets, particularly when the economy is a bit shaky.
So let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Safe haven assets like gold and silver, are those kind of like a financial shelter when there's a storm, so to speak? Do they hold their value even when everything else in the market is going crazy?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that's exactly why the documentary recommends including them in a diversified portfolio. They basically act as a counterbalance to assets that are more volatile, like stocks, or even, as we talked about, Bitcoin.
So we've got the high-tech potential of Bitcoin, the stability of tangible assets like real estate and precious metals. But wait, there's more. The documentary also goes into the power of earning consistently and building what they call evergreen businesses. Can you explain what they mean by that?
Yeah, so an evergreen business is basically one that's built to last. It focuses on a need that's not going to go away anytime soon, no matter what's happening in the economy or with technology. Think healthcare, education, or even like essential goods and services. Those needs are always going to be there. But how we meet those needs, that's what might change over time. That's where the innovation comes in.
So it's more than just picking the right industry. It's about being adaptable and constantly learning within that chosen industry. Like healthcare, for example, that need is always going to be there. But the way we approach healthcare, that's changing all the time. It's pretty amazing to think about how these essential needs can really fuel innovation in business.
You got it. The documentary highlights how important it is for businesses to adapt to new technology and changes in what consumers want. And of course, just evolving markets in general. It's all about staying relevant and making sure you're providing value in a way that meets the demands of the moment.
They also really push this idea of building multiple income streams. Don't just rely on one job or one single source of income. It's like the classic saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket, which feels especially relevant today, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Having multiple income streams creates a safety net and opens up more opportunities for growth. It could be side hustles, freelance work, investing, or even building a business while you're still working your main job. The takeaway is that building wealth shouldn't be a passive thing. You have to be proactive and find those opportunities to boost your earning potential.
So it's not about waiting for wealth to just show up at your doorstep. It's about creating it. I love that. All right, let's shift gears a little and talk about a more traditional approach that the documentary mentions. Investing in the S&P 500 and this idea of the buy and hold philosophy.
Okay, so this is where patience and that long-term thinking really come into play. The S&P 500 is an index, and it basically tracks the performance of 500 of the biggest publicly traded companies in the U.S. When you invest in an S&P 500 index fund or ETF, you're essentially putting your money on the overall growth of the U.S. economy.
Okay, so break this down for me a little.
Yeah.
What exactly are ETFs and why are they mentioned here?
An ETF is like, well, think of it like a basket of stocks. And in this case, an S&P 500 ETF would have shares of all the companies in the S&P 500 index. This gives you instant diversification because your money isn't all in one single company. Instead, you're spreading the risk across hundreds of companies, all within this, one easy-to-buy package.
So ETFs are another way to avoid putting all your eggs in one basket. But what about that buy and hold part of this strategy?
It's pretty self-explanatory, actually. You buy into the S&P 500 through that index fund or ETF, and then you hold on to those investments for the long haul. Even when the market has those dips and fluctuations, the idea is that over time, the market generally goes up. And by staying invested, you can benefit from that overall upward trend. The documentary highlights this approach as a way to really leverage those compounding returns.
That makes sense. You mentioned compounding returns. Can you explain what that means?
Okay, imagine a snowball rolling down a hill.
Right?
It starts picking up more snow as it rolls, getting bigger and bigger. Compounding is kind of like that. When your investments earn a return, those earnings are reinvested, and that generates even more returns. So over time, those returns build on each other, which leads to significant growth.
That's a great visual. But even with something like the S&P 500, which has historically performed well, the documentary still adds a little bit of a warning there. They're acknowledging that, nothing is guaranteed.
Right. They remind us that just because something has performed well in the past doesn't necessarily mean it'll continue to perform well in the future. The S&P 500 does have a pretty strong track record, but there can be periods of volatility and even times when the market goes down. It's important to remember that every investment has some risk involved. That buy and hold philosophy, that's a long-term strategy. It takes patience and the ability to ride out those market fluctuations without panicking.
So having a strong stomach is good when it comes to investing. This is where I think the documentary takes a really interesting turn. They suggest investing in art, which feels like a very unconventional approach to building generational wealth.
It definitely caught my eye as well. The documentary acknowledges that art is not your typical investment, but they make the case that art does have the potential to appreciate considerably over time.
But art feels so subjective. How do you even approach it as an investment?
It's definitely not as straightforward as just buying a piece you like and hoping it'll go up in value. The documentary really emphasizes doing your research, understanding the art market, maybe even working with reputable galleries or art advisors.
So it's about treating art like any other investment, with research, strategy, and of course, assessing the risks.
Exactly. It's about understanding the things that drive value in the art world, like the artist's career, the demand for their work, and just general market trends. The documentary even encourages people to look at emerging artists, those whose work has the potential to become much more valuable down the line.
It's like finding that hidden gem, that up-and-coming artist who's about to blow up. Sounds exciting and a little bit intimidating.
Definitely requires a good eye and a willingness to do your homework. But the documentary suggests that art can offer more than just financial returns. You also get the satisfaction of owning something beautiful and culturally significant.
So it goes beyond just the financial aspect. It's about aligning your investments with your passions and what you value.
Precisely. And that leads us to another key point that the documentary brings up. The importance of writing a will, especially in today's world with all these digital assets becoming more and more common.
Okay, wills. Not as glamorous as Bitcoin or art, but definitely important. Why are they emphasizing this so much?
A will is the cornerstone of protecting your legacy. It ensures that your assets are distributed according to your wishes. And that includes your digital stuff like cryptocurrency, online accounts, and intellectual property. When we're talking about building generational wealth, a will provides clarity. It helps prevent potential arguments among your heirs, and it makes sure that all your hard-earned assets are passed down the way you intended.
It's like putting all the pieces in place to create a real lasting impact, making sure that your vision for the future actually continues on.
Exactly. It's about thinking beyond your own lifetime and setting things up so that future generations can benefit from your planning and hard work.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. From the cutting edge of Bitcoin to the classic appeal of real estate. From the world of art to the practicalities of having a will. It's pretty clear that building generational wealth in 2025 and beyond requires a multi-pronged approach. But we're just getting started. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll take an even deeper look at some of the specific strategies outlined in the documentary. And we'll explore how you can apply these insights to your own wealth building journey. So, stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into building generational wealth. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks here. Let's look at some actual strategies that we can use to make these concepts a reality. We talked about cash flowing properties as this kind of foundation, but the documentary also throws in this interesting twist on real estate. They suggest seeking out emerging markets, especially for 2025. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, you see, emerging markets, they often represent areas with like this dynamic growth, lots of development happening. Think about cities or regions that are experiencing this big influx of people, a surge in jobs, or even like major improvements to infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And these factors can really drive up the demand for housing, which can lead to higher rental income and property values increasing more quickly.
So it's like getting in early before everyone else catches on. Before these places become the next big thing and prices go through the roof, it's kind of like finding those hidden gems in the real estate world. But how do you even go about identifying these emerging markets? What are some signs that investors should look for?
Well, the documentary suggests putting on your detective hat.
Oh, I like that.
You got to dive into the data, look at population trends, economic indicators, and scrutinize those local development plans.
Hmm.
So you might look at cities with industries that are booming, universities that are attracting tons of young professionals, or even areas that are planned for major infrastructure projects, because those projects can have a big impact on property values.
So it's like this mix of number crunching and actually going out there and seeing what's happening on the ground. Very cool. Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about those precious metals, gold and silver. The documentary recommends diversifying your portfolio with them, either by owning the actual physical metals or through ETFs. We talked about diversification earlier, but can you remind us why it's so important?
You know how you wouldn't want to eat just one type of food all the time?
Right.
Your investment portfolio is kind of like that.
Okay.
Diversification is all about spreading your investments across different asset classes.
Like stocks, bonds, real estate, and yeah, precious metals.
It helps to lower your overall risk, so if one investment isn't doing so well, the others can help soften the blow.
So gold and silver, they're like the healthy greens in our investment salad. They give us that balance and stability. But why specifically these metals?
Gold and silver have this long history.
Yeah.
They've always been considered safe haven assets.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to hold their value or even go up in value when things get a little uncertain. Like, think economic uncertainty, geopolitical stuff happening, or even high inflation.
Yeah.
This makes them a really good counterbalance to things that are more volatile.
Like stocks or even Bitcoin, which we talked about earlier.
Right.
It's like having this built-in insurance policy for your investment strategy. I love that. Now let's move on to building an evergreen business. That's a concept that the documentary really seems to love. So what are some of the things that define this type of business model?
An evergreen business is all about tapping into a need that's not going anywhere.
Okay.
Something that people will always need no matter what's going on with the economy or technology.
Like what?
Think healthcare, education, food production,
Uh-huh.
those essential services that will always be relevant.
Gotcha. So it's not just about picking the right industry. It's about being able to adapt and change with the times. I'm thinking back to what you said earlier about healthcare. The need for healthcare, that's not going away. But how we approach it, how we deliver healthcare, that's what's constantly changing. So an evergreen healthcare business would need to keep up with those changes, right?
You nailed it. An evergreen business needs to embrace innovation.
Uh-huh.
Always be looking for ways to make their offerings better and adapt to what consumers want.
Okay.
Maybe a traditional bookstore might move online, start offering ebooks and audiobooks,
Yeah.
or even create a personalized recommendation system based on what people are reading.
Mm.
It's all about staying relevant and delivering value in a
Yeah.
way that meets people's needs.
So it's not just about building a business that lasts. It's about becoming the kind of business owner who can thrive in any environment.
I like that. Speaking of adapting and evolving, the documentary also emphasizes the importance of always learning and developing new skills, especially if you want to build an evergreen business. Why is that so crucial? Because in today's world, things change so fast.
Yeah.
Skills can become outdated really quickly.
Yeah, that's true.
Think about how technology is constantly changing almost every single industry.
Yeah.
If you want to stay competitive and make sure your business can last, you need to be committed to lifelong learning.
Hmm.
You could be taking courses, going to industry events, or just staying informed about what's new and emerging.
That's great advice. So it's not just about building a business that lasts, it's about becoming someone who can adapt and thrive. And that's a valuable skill no matter what you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go back to a more traditional investment strategy for a sec. The S&P 500 and that buy and hold philosophy. This approach seems to be all about patience, discipline, and thinking long term.
You got it. It's about trusting that the market will generally go up over time and not letting your emotions get the best of you when there are short-term ups and downs.
Right.
The documentary talks a lot about the power of compounding returns over time, which we touched on a bit before.
I remember that snowball analogy. So how does that play out in the real world with something like the S&P 500? Can you give me an example?
Sure, let's say you put $10,000 into an S&P 500 index fund. And let's assume the market gives you an average return of 7% per year.
Okay.
In 10 years, even if you don't add any more money, your investment could almost double just from those returns being reinvested year after year.
Wow.
It's pretty powerful.
It really shows how those small gains can turn into big growth over time. It's like magic. But even with the S&P 500, which has had a strong track record, the documentary reminds us that there are no guarantees when it comes to investing.
Exactly. Just because something has performed well in the past doesn't mean it'll always perform well.
Right.
While the S&P 500 has done well historically, there can be periods of volatility. There can even be times when the market goes down.
Mm-hmm.
The buy and hold approach works best when you're in it for the long haul, when you can handle those market fluctuations without freaking out.
So patience and, I guess, a little bit of resilience are key for the strategy to work. Okay, let's move on to something a bit more out of the box. Investing in art. The documentary suggests that art can be a good asset for building generational wealth, but they also acknowledge that there are risks.
Oh, the art market. It's such a fascinating world,
It is.
full of passion, creativity, and, yeah, financial risk, too.
It's not for everyone, right?
No, definitely not. Values can change dramatically. Trends come and go. It takes a certain level of knowledge and expertise to navigate it effectively.
So it's not just about buying a painting you like and hoping it goes up in value. What advice does the documentary give for approaching art as an investment?
Research, research, research. They really emphasize the importance of understanding the art market. Maybe even working with galleries or art advisors who really know their stuff.
Okay.
Learn about different art movements, artists, and what makes a piece valuable.
So it's about approaching art with both passion and strategy.
Exactly. And they also suggest considering emerging artists.
Those who are just starting to get noticed.
Exactly. Their work often has the potential to really increase in value in the future.
It's like discovering that next big artist before everyone else does. That's pretty cool. And it's not just about the money either.
Right.
There's something special about owning a piece of art.
Absolutely. A lot of people find real satisfaction in owning something beautiful and culturally significant.
It's a way to connect your investments with your own values and what you're passionate about.
Exactly. And speaking of values, let's circle back to the documentary's advice on writing a will, especially now with all these digital assets we have.
Right, wills. Maybe not the most exciting part of building generational wealth, but super important.
Absolutely. A will ensures that your assets, including all those digital things like cryptocurrency, online accounts, even your intellectual property, are taken care of.
Yeah.
They're distributed according to your wishes.
It's about making sure your legacy goes on, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It provides clarity, helps prevent disagreements among your heirs, and ensures that everything you've worked hard for benefits future generations.
It's like bringing together all those pieces of your wealth, both the physical and the digital, and creating something that lasts.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've gone from emerging real estate markets to diversifying with precious metals, from building an evergreen business to taking that long-term approach with the S&P 500. And we even touched on the potential of art as an investment.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. We've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
What really stands out to me is the documentary's focus on taking control of your financial future.
Yeah.
It's about being proactive, finding those opportunities, and building a strong foundation for wealth that can last for generations.
And doing it in a way that aligns with your own values and your vision for the future. But our deep dive isn't over yet. In the final part, we'll explore some of the bigger themes that the documentary presents, and we'll discuss how you can apply these insights to your own wealth-building journey. So stay tuned. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into building generational wealth. We've covered a lot of ground here, from Bitcoin to real estate to art, even wills. As we wrap things up, I'm curious, what do you think the overall message of this documentary is? If you had to boil it down to, say, a few key takeaways, what would they be?
I think the big takeaway is the importance of being adaptable and innovative and having a long-term vision. They really push us to move beyond those old school ideas about building wealth. They want us to embrace these new ideas, emerging tech, even approaches that seem a little unconventional.
Yeah, it's like they want us to be pioneers in the financial world, to be open to new things and not be afraid of the unknown.
Exactly. Things are changing so quickly these days. The strategies that worked in the past might not cut it in the future. So this documentary, it really highlights how important it is to stay informed, be open to new ideas, and adapt as the world changes. Like, don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone and see what's out there.
And it's not just about building wealth for ourselves, right? There's this emphasis on leaving a legacy, on creating something that lasts and helps future generations.
Absolutely. It's not just about stacking up money. It's about creating this foundation of financial security, knowledge, and values that you can pass down.
Yeah.
The documentary talks about teaching younger generations about managing money responsibly and the importance of giving back.
It's like creating this ripple effect that goes way beyond just ourselves. One thing that struck me as we were talking about all these different strategies is that they all seem to require a certain level of knowing yourself, whether it's Bitcoin or building a business or buying art. You need to understand how much risk you're comfortable with, your own values, and what you're trying to achieve in the long run.
That's so true. It's about finding what clicks with you, what you're excited about, and what you can actually do.
Right.
There's no single right answer, no one-size-fits-all approach to building generational wealth.
So for someone who's listening to this, feeling inspired but maybe a little overwhelmed, what advice would you give them? Where should they even start?
I'd say start by figuring out what's important to you. What do you want your legacy to be? What kind of impact do you want to have? Once you have that vision, then you can start looking at specific strategies that fit with that vision.
So don't just pick a strategy at random. Really understand why you're choosing it.
Right. And don't be afraid to try things out.
Yeah.
Experiment a little, see what works for you. And remember, building generational wealth, it's a journey, not a destination.
It's about always learning and growing.
Exactly.
Embrace the adventure. Well, we've definitely explored a ton in this deep dive. We've talked about so much, from Bitcoin to real estate, art to wills, and everything in between. We've looked at this multifaceted approach to building generational wealth.
And this documentary, it really challenges us to think outside the box, to embrace innovation and approach wealth building with that long-term vision.
It's not just about our own financial security. It's about creating something that lasts
And helps future generations succeed.